Hi everyone, my name is Jochen. I'm going to keep this intro very short. If you want more information about who I am and what I do, please check the first video in this series. There's no need to repeat all that here. Please note that for a full understanding of what the Greater Kruger Area has to offer you, you will need to watch the other videos in this series as well. For example, our next video focuses solely on the Kruger Private Reserves. And then there's also videos with tips and tricks, questions and answers, and so on. To get an overview of what info you can find in which video, please also see the first video in this series. We recommend you watch them all prior to starting with the planning of your Kruger safari. Okay, so the first thing I need to do when showing you guys the Kruger National Park is obviously explain some differences when it comes to types of accommodation. So here we have the map of Kruger again. And let me just switch on, I'm not going to switch on the Kruger gates, it's a bit irrelevant, but I'm going to switch on the rest camps and the satellite camps. And that is the first thing I need to explain. So what is a rest camp, what is a satellite camp and all that? Well, Kruger has got what I would describe as small villages in the middle of the bush. That is a rest camp. So if you enter such a small village, you do so via a gate. So that village has a gate and it's completely fenced all around. So the wildlife is kept out. And as you enter, you'll see that there's lots of different things around you. For example, there's, for starters, lots of different types of accommodation for the main rest camps. They have camping spots for self-drivers and campers. They've got the typical small huts, which they call rondavels. They have bigger huts, like small cottages for families. They might have tents. And, in all these categories of tents and huts and all that, they have, again, different types. Some have a few, some don't. Some are accessible by people in a wheelchair. Some are not. Some have all the amenities. For some, there's communal amenities, like you have to use a communal kitchen and a communal shower room or ablution block. So there's lots of different types of accommodation there. Now, a little bit further in this video, I'll explain a little bit more about the different types and how you can see the difference and so on the SANParks website. But that's not for now. So I'm just going to continue explaining everything else that's in such a rest camp. Because it's not just accommodation. There is obviously a reception area. There is, in most rest camps, more than one restaurant, at least one restaurant, but there's sometimes more. There is a shop where you can get all types of things for people staying over as well as for people just visiting the camp, not just food, it's souvenirs and everything. There's also even a gas station there, a swimming pool, only accessible obviously for people staying over, a big swimming pool, central swimming pool. They even have stuff like an outdoor cinema and so on. So there's lots of things in such a rest camp. It's a small village in the middle of the bush. That's one type of camp that they have. They also have another type of camp, which I describe as a satellite camp. Now, Kruger or SANParks website themselves they put a difference between a satellite camp and a bushveld camp. To me, they're just the same. The only difference is that a bushveld camp is far away from a main rest camp, while a satellite camp is actually just a short distance away from one of the main rest camps. That's the only difference. But other than that, a satellite camp is a satellite camp. So what is a satellite camp? It's actually just the same, again, as a rest camp, but just much smaller. So it's fenced all around, it's got a gate and then a small reception building, but there's no shops. There is no restaurant. There is no gas station. They have limited types of accommodation. So most of the time it's only one type of or two types of accommodation, like cottages and so on. So there's far less choices when it comes to accommodation, but that is a satellite camp. So people booking an overnight stay at a satellite camp have to make sure that they're fully self-reliant, so that once they enter, for example, they enter at 5 o'clock and at 5:30 the gates close, because you have to be in your gate at a certain time in Kruger, like either out the park or in your rest camp gate to stay the night at your accommodation. And well, once you enter the gate there, you have to make sure that you can stay overnight, that you have food, that you've got everything with you, that you don't need to go to a shop, that you've got gas in your tank to start your next day's drive to maybe a main rest camp where they do have gas, but you can't enter a satellite camp on an empty gas tank. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So when it comes to the difference between both, one has all the amenities and all the things you could think of and all the things that you could possibly want, while the other one is for people that are fully self-reliant, that actually don't need anything to stay over one night or even multiple nights. That is the main difference, and I'll be going into detail later on in this video, on how you can see what type of accommodation is what on the SANParks website. Now you know what a rest camp is. I do want to put on the map again the lodges in Kruger National Park, because I need to explain the difference between a rest camp and a lodge. Having said that, I'm not going to go deeper into them than that, because I kind of want to keep them in the other video, the next video, when we discuss the private reserves, because in essence, these private lodges in Kruger National Park are also on their private reserve. More precisely, they are actually on their own private concession, where no daytime tourists can come, where no people who stay overnight in the rest camps can come, so they don't even share the same roads. So for now, I'm just putting them on the map so I can explain the difference between a lodge and one of the rest camps. Now, to explain the difference, the best approach, I think, is to just see it from the perspective of the people visiting Kruger and what they expect when it comes to their safari. The rest camps, as well as the satellite camps, are actually created a long time ago with one type of specific customer in mind, which is the self-driver / self-caterer. So yes, there is restaurants and all that, but there's also a shop, and the accommodation in the rest camps do have either a kitchen you have a kitchen in your unit, in your accommodation unit, or you have a communal kitchen where you can cook your food. So typically, people staying over at a rest camp, they don't need any services, or they need very little services when compared to people staying at a lodge. So people in a rest camp will drive themselves, they will cook themselves, and so on, for the most part. That's how those rest camps started up. To be complete, these days, most rest camps do offer these services. So they have restaurants so that you don't have to cook yourself. They do offer game drives in the morning and in the afternoon, and even sometimes night game drives that you can join and pay separately, even if you are a self-driver. But the bottom line is, those rest camps are created for people who most of the time do not need or want those types of services. Now, a lodge is actually the complete opposite. So it's typically people that are staying there that do not have a car of their own, so not South African residents, that do not want to drive themselves, for example, because they don't trust driving in a big five area, that they don't have the knowledge, but also they don't want to cook themselves. They're really on a vacation, so they want everything catered for them. So these lodges foresee just a room, so to speak. It's typically more upscale and of a higher standard than what is offered in the rest camps. So it is rather luxurious, those rooms, but it is just a room. It doesn't have its own kitchen, for example. There's just a bedroom and a bathroom. And then when people are staying over at such a lodge, they follow a certain regime, a certain schedule, a daily schedule. They go out in the morning for a 3-hour game drive with a guide in an open vehicle. So it's not in a closed car as you would typically drive when you're a self-driver. It's an open vehicle. They drive around with a guide for 3 hours looking for animals. They return to the lodge, then have breakfast, then have some free time in the lodge where they can read a book or have a plunge in the pool. And then basically there's nothing happening in the hottest hours of the day until 2 o'clock, when they serve lunch for everyone. And after lunch, there's a game drive again for like 3 hours in the afternoon, where a guide takes them out again looking for animals. and then they return to the lodge for dinner. And that's it. And this happens over and over and over every day. So it is for another type of public, and it is obviously also more expensive than accommodation in a rest camp. Okay, so now you know what a lodge is as well as what a rest camp is. However, as I said before, we're going to keep the question, what do I choose, lodge or rest camp, private reserve or Kruger National Park? What is best for me? We're going to park that question until video number 5 when we give tips and tricks, because obviously we haven't discussed all types of lodges yet. What I mean by that is that in the private reserves, lodges are doing things slightly different than the lodges I've just shown you in Kruger National Park. So let's park that question for now. The next section in this video will be about the different regions that you find in Kruger. Now, if you look online and you start Googling around a bit, you'll find maps that have lots of regions depending on vegetation. There's like 9 or 10 regions and stuff. But from a tourist perspective, those maps, regional maps, are not very useful, I'd say. They're too complex, and lots of what they call different regions is just different types of vegetation. But in terms of your game drive results, making a difference between bushveld and riverine vegetation or grassland and this and that doesn't really make sense, doesn't make any difference, because you'll be driving, if you do Kruger, you'll be driving anyway. You'll be driving huge loops and game drives that take hours, and they will take you through more than one of those types of vegetation. So why actually make the difference? So instead, I would actually like to go with a slightly different approach. I'm just gonna divide the park in 4 different regions. The first region being the south section. Now the south section is actually this big block here. All this. The widest section of the Kruger Park, I'd say. And that is actually, from visitors' perspective, it's got the most flowing rivers. It receives by far the most rainfall. So the further south you go in this continent, the more you get into moderate temperatures, the more rainfall. So in other words, it's also the greenest, right? Which actually means, in terms of animal density, it does have the most animals. But obviously, since it's a very popular section of the park, it also receives by far the most visitors. It's got lots of camps, as you can see, lots of big rest camps. Kukuza and Lower Sabi are absolutely huge, for example. And, you've got lots of people driving around there. But also in the south section, you've got these estates that offer lots of accommodation, so people can stay at the borders of Kruger Park and go in every day. There's the big city of Nelspruit nearby and all that. You might have day visitors just going in for a day, in the weekend to the park. So you've got lots and lots and lots of visitors there driving around. So you'll see lots of cars, which are self-drivers, but you'll also see lots of open vehicles from all the lodges nearby or from the Kruger rest camps themselves. So it can be quite busy on popular days, and if you get into a cat sighting, you might easily get into what we call a bush jam. So basically, people queuing up to see like the tail end of a cat, which is really rather annoying. It also has 4 entrance gates, and that doesn't really help, right? The more entrance gates you have, the easier people from around the park can basically get into the park. So if I just click on those, then you can see them. One is a little bit hidden here, Crocodile Bridge Gate, but you got Malelani, Numbi, and Paul Kruger Gate. So it's 4 gates. Lots of people can get in through those gates. Lots of daytime tourists, and there's lots of lodges nearby these gates, and so that's why you get lots of people there. So that's certainly something to keep in mind when you plan your stay in Kruger Park. So that's the south section. Then there's the middle section, and I'm just gonna scroll up a little bit. And the middle section is actually what I would say anything around Satara area here, the grasslands around Satara, all the way to Orpen Gate, even Talamati, and all the water holes below that here. A few nice ones on the main road, the H1 going up, and then all the way to even Olifants and Letaba here in the north. Here finally you get some flowing rivers again. You get the Letaba River coming down here, as you see, and you get the Olifants River. That passes Balunecamp and passes that goes into the Letaba River basically. So those are flowing rivers. So this section of the park is actually, in comparison to the south, it's actually much quieter. There's less rest camps, less big rest camps. They're further apart. But there's also less daytime visitors, as there's less entrance gates. You see, there's only Falaborwa and Orpen Gate. Now, Falaborwa is a mining town. It's not the nicest area to stay. There are some accommodation options there, but they are rather basic. So people tend to avoid that area a bit when it comes to tourism, which is understandable. And then Orpen Gate as well. Okay, it is an entrance gate, but if you think about amount of lodges that are nearby, allowing drives into Kruger Park, it's rather limited in comparison to any of the gates in the south. And I'd certainly say in comparison to the most southern gates like Crocodile Bridge and Malelane. Why is there less less lodges around Orpen Gate here? Well, that's because you can't see it right now because I haven't switched them on. But that's because there's plenty of Kruger Private Reserves nearby. So right here would be Magneleti, and then just above Orpen Gate, you've got Timbavati and Tony Bush. So all those lodges on those reserves will drive on those reserves. They do not go into Kruger and into Orpen Gate, to drive around with the other daytime visitors and such. No, they will stay in their own area because there's less people there. It's much better for them. It's much more exclusive, and it's much more intimate. So those lodges in those private reserves stay on their private reserves and offer game drives there. So you have to go beyond the private reserves, further away towards the mountainside, before you come to any lodge or whatever, bed and breakfast or houses for rent or whatever, that you can book as accommodation and use as your base to go into Kruger for day drives. So there's lots less lodges here. Because they are further away, and the further away they are, the less interesting it gets for people to drive into the Kruger National Park for safari drives. So that is why there's less people in this section. When it comes to wildlife, though, it's actually an awesome section to be. I'd say it's actually the best section to be, arguably, I know, but it's just that there might be less flowing rivers, but there's still those two, Letaba and Olifants River in the north there. Of this section, but there's also very large water holes. So animal-wise, it's still quite okay. You can still have amazing animal sightings, like the S100, which is like a dirt road leading off of Satara all the way to the almost the border of Mozambique, is known as a cat magnet. There's lots of lion sightings there. Basically, all the grasslands around Satara is like the only section you can actually find cheetah. Cheetahs need open grasslands to for their ability, for their speed. They need to catch animals by speed, so they need to be able to run. And if the terrain is too pushy or rocky or whatever, that is not for them the most ideal vegetation, the most ideal sector to drive in. But around Satara, it's all grassland for the most part. So, that's where you get to see your cheetahs. There's also, for example, the S147. It's a little one-way loop now. There's no roads on this thing, so I can't show you, but it's between Satara and Olifantskamp. It's rather new, but that place is known as a little bit of a leopard magnet. So there's a very relaxed leopardess there. That girl is called the S147 female, or the Ngotso female, because that's the little river or dry riverbed. It's called Ngotso. There's also Ngotso pants there. So she's seen a lot. So in terms of animals, it's certainly worth choosing the middle section of the park, as it is much less visited. And the rest camps are quite nice as well. And I particularly like Olifantskamp because of the view. It looks out over the Letaba river. Very nice view from top of the hill. And then Letaba actually has the Olifants Museum. So if you haven't seen that, I would certainly spend at least an hour there. They have the skulls and tusks of all the big elephant tuskers that died in the park of natural causes, mostly. They just assembled all those and made a nice museum for them. And it's quite awesome to see that museum. So yeah, that's the central section of the park. When it comes to other sections, if you go further up north, and that actually already starts, from Letaba. So Letaba is actually already in that sector, to be honest, but it still has the river, so that's why I still have put it in the middle section. But from Letaba, let's say, more or less, even Falaborwa Gate, all the way high up north, past Chingwedzi here, is a big Mopani block. And that third section of the park is maybe the least popular of all. And why is that? Well, that's because it is actually Mopani is a vegetation that's very boring. You'll easily recognize Mopani trees when you look at their leaves. It's the only leaf that's in the shape of a butterfly. So one leaf is actually has two sections which look like the wing of a butterfly. And Mopani basically pushes out almost all other types of vegetation. It makes the soil slightly acidic, apparently, just like pine forests do, which means that grasses and other trees are, they thrive less in between those Mopani trees. So it becomes a rather boring landscape of Mopani trees, and it's not, apart from the leaf, it's not the nicest tree to look at, in the sense that it's very weird, but all Mopani trees are like the same height. It looks like they're kept at the same height for some reason, or they keep themselves at the same height, apart from here and there one huge Mopani tree that's allowed to rise above the other vegetation, the other Mopani vegetation. And it's really weird, and I don't think anyone has actually explained so far, has been able to explain so far why that is. But it's only when one of those big Mopani trees dies that another tree, apparently rather random, is allowed to go higher than most Mopanis again. Yeah, nobody actually can explain why that vegetation actually works that way. Anyway, the bottom line is that Mopani, it's a leaf, so and there's not that much grass, so only browsers tend to be in that area and not grazers. And there's not a lot of animals that actually like the leaves. So what can you find in the Mopani sectors, in the Mopani blocks? Typically elephants, because they eat all types of greenery, they don't mind. Black rhino, because obviously those are browsers, but you have to be very lucky to see those. Yeah, I've been here for 7 years now and I haven't seen one there. I've seen some in the private reserves, but not in that Mopani block. Old Dagaboy, so that's old male buffaloes, tend to hide in the Mopani. They don't have the protection from the herds anymore, so they hide and they look for a little bit of grass to eat and some mud to wallow in. But yeah, they are in there. Kudus obviously is a big antelope, that's a browser. But yeah, on average there's less animals, which also means less predators. It's a dense vegetation, which also means like limited visibility. So it's not a popular section of the park, which doesn't mean there are some nice areas though. If you really take your time and stick to those areas, you might see some very nice things. You might also see some animals that you are not gonna find anywhere else in the park, like roan antelope, for example. They tend to stick to that area as well, and the huge elephant tuskers, by the way. So if you've got something for those huge elephant bulls with huge tusks, then those are to be found in that section of the park. And obviously if you run into one of those, that's an awesome sighting. So for those, you could also say, I'm going to stay a couple of days at Bateleur, for example, and look for my big elephant bulls. So yeah, it's certainly something to think about. But yeah, so on average, I'd say this section of the park has got by far the least amount of tourists. Now, that doesn't complete the whole picture. There's one more thing here up north, and that's the northern section, right? There's, let's say, Punamaria I would even include that in that northern section. So as you come out of that Mopani block, it's a bit of grassland again, and then finally the very green and lush vegetation around the Pafuri River. That is a beautiful area as well. And since it's so far, it hardly receives any visitors. So there's also like a very limited accommodation, and it's a far drive. So it's certainly something to put on your list if you're looking for to get away from the crowds. It's a beautiful area, especially the Bafuri River is very lush. It's got these huge nyala trees, and also an antelope called a nyala, which is very difficult to see anywhere else in the park. So yeah, so that's the fourth and smallest section of the park, the tip all the way north. Okay, so now you know which regions there are in Kruger. Suppose you say, okay, it's time to start looking for the right accommodation, and that does not only mean the right rest camp, but also the right type of hut or cottage or tent or whatever. Well, this is one last thing I would like to do in this video, is show you, what different types of accommodation each rest camp has, and how you can see that on the website of SANParks. So basically, if you want to book accommodation with SANParks, so in the park, you go to the SANParks website. Here you go, which is sanpark.org, by the way. I'm just gonna try and fit it all in our screen here so that you can see with me where I am. So this is the main the main page, homepage of SANParks. So you go to Explore Parks and you go to Kruger National Park. And once you are on the next page, well, you can, there's a huge menu with lots of different things and information, all that, but the easiest way is to go to where to stay and then availability accommodation. Not just accommodation, which explains what accommodation is, but this you can immediately, with this one you can immediately see if there's availability for the dates that you would want. So if you choose that menu option, you come to a list of what camps, all camps there are in Kruger National Park. So as I explained, you've got the main rest camps. So these are the big camps, you see, Bergendal, Crocodile Bridge, and so on. And the satellite camps, so the camps that do not have all amenities, but that are close to a main rest camp that do have all the amenities, are also in this list. So you can see Malalanet, Senze, Balulet, those are all satellite camps. And then if you take the second option here, then you've got the bushveld camps. But again, as I said, I don't make that distinction. To me, they're also satellite camps. They're just further away from a main rest camp. So this is where you can find, your list of camps. And if you click on one, and let's just choose, why not Olifants, by the way. So if you choose one, you'll come to a list of accommodation types that this particular rest camp has on offer. As you can see, there's quite a few. But which one does offer what? Well, sometimes you can go by the codes, the letters here. For example, there's a number here, 232, might be going up 4, there you go, and so on. Those typically means the amount of people that can stay in such a bungalow, for example, 2 beds or 3 beds, and so on. If there's a Z, that actually means that it's a unit that is accessible for people in a wheelchair. If it has a U or a V, typically it means a view. At least for a V, it certainly means that. For a U, sometimes it means that. So it's not always correct. I know some camps that for some reason mention a U when they have a view, but certainly most camps work with the V. What does a view actually mean? Well, as I said, it's a rest camp. So it's a bit of a little village in the middle of the bush. That means that all accommodation in such a rest camp is not necessarily located at the fence line. You've got units that are, accommodation units that are in the middle of such a rest camp. And if you would like a unit with a view, then you must pay attention to which unit you book. So you have to book one that has like a V in its little code name, because those are the ones that are next to a fence line that offer you a view towards the bush. Instead of seeing, what's on your neighbor's plate and so on, only the accommodations with a V offer you a view towards the bush. And typically they are also a little bit more expensive than the other types of accommodation. So you can, by the code, you can actually already see what's what. But even better is to just hover over them here. So now you can see, for example, this bungalow, which is BG2Z, has 2 beds, 2 single beds. They have air conditioning, all of them. But as you can see, it's a communal kitchen. So there's no kitchen in this unit. If you want to cook, you'll have to go to a communal kitchen where everybody cooks his or her food. So, you might have to queue there before the hot plates become free and stuff like that. It does have a fridge though, this unit. Yeah, and as I said, the Z, means that you can actually access by wheelchair. So all these accommodations are different types of accommodations that are on offer just at Olifant's Restcamp. And then you can easily see, can calculate, the base rate is this for 1 unit, that's 2 people. But for example, this one has 3 beds, so if you want to put an extra adult in there, it's 280 extra. If it's a child of less than 12 years old, it's 140 rands extra. And these are the rates, that are valid to I think to the end of October of this year. So sometimes, don't forget, sometimes they also put like 2 lines in here with 2 different rates because it's the same unit, but the rates change. For now, there's no new rates yet for later than October of this year. And then you can just book, you can book and pay online by selecting your camp again and going on and on and on. I'm not gonna go into those details, but from here it's quite easy to make a booking with SANParks. If you book, do not forget that this is not your only cost, your accommodation cost. You also need access to the park. So don't forget, you also need to foresee for a foreigner that is 400 rands per day as access fee per person, while as for a South African national, that's only 100 rands a day. But yeah, so you have to calculate 400 rands per person per day extra just to be in the park. So it doesn't mean that if you book accommodation that you're allowed in the park. Your entrance fee is separate. Obviously, you can make it a little bit less expensive by buying what we call a wildcard. And I don't know if there's a direct link here. Here you go, on the main page, Wildcard. Now this wildcard thing, it's not easy to explain. Basically, it's a card that you buy either for a person or for a small family. Typically, people from overseas would buy it for the whole family, as it allows, your partner plus your kids to be added to the wildcard. And it's got like, if you buy such a card, it's valid for 1 year, and for all parks, so not just Kruger Park, but for all parks in South Africa that are SANParks, parks or national parks. And it's a one-off fee that you pay then for such card. But if you start calculating how much entrance fees per person per day are for all the parks you visit, typically, for example, if you do a trip around South Africa and you visit maybe 1 or 2 parks more, Mfolozi, if you go south, close to the coastline of KwaZulu-Natal, is also one other park that's very popular. Addo National Park, close to Port Elizabeth, is also one of those. If you put those on your list while visiting South Africa and you calculate all those daily fees, entrance fees per person that you normally need to pay, then it can actually become cheaper if you just buy a wild card. It'll be expensive, but on a per person, per park basis, it'll be less expensive in the end. You just have to make the calculation yourself. I wouldn't buy it if you're just staying in Kruger National Park for like a day or two, because that's not worth it. Then you'd rather pay the daily fee and just forget about it. But if you're staying for longer periods and in more than one SANPark National Park, then it's certainly worth buying a wild card. Now, one last thing I need to say about that is, some people start panicking a little bit, like, am I going to get my plastic wild card in time for me to take on holiday with me and to show at the gate and this and that? Forget about the plastic card. They sometimes come like even up to like a year after you have booked. So the only thing you need, you'll get an email after paying, and you'll get an email confirmation and a number on there and this and that. That's the only thing, the only proof you need to bring along, which is enough for people at the reception areas of the gates to find you in their database of people who are on a wildcard. So the plastic thing is just a representation, just a physical thing to show that you have a wildcard, but it's not like that you are in the system. You are known with a certain, paying customer number, and that is actually on an email that you get as you pay for your wildcard. So you just print that email, you take that with you, and you're sorted. Okay, so this concludes our little video on Kruger National Park. I hope you have a little bit of a better idea now what the park is all about. We will go on with a next video explaining all the private reserves in detail and how things are done there safari-wise. Yeah, so please, if you're thinking about going to Kruger, watch that as well. Then in the next video, we will explain how you can easily combine your stay in Kruger with some other very nice regions nearby in South Africa and neighboring countries. And then in video number 5, we will actually give you lots of tips and tricks when it comes to planning your Kruger safari. So only in that video we will start comparing the private reserves with the Kruger National Park and give you all positives and negatives of both and how to outweigh those and how for yourself to make a decision based on your expectations, based on your budget, and so on. So we'll hope to see you in our next videos.